What's this blur?
That's a blast from the past, Silicon Graphics InPerson video conferencing. Let's talk about legacy network technology. I'm the Vintage Collector and these are my stories. As part of my recent venture into Silicon Graphics UNIX Workstations, you've been briefly seeing the O2 cam already last time when I retrofitted the audiovisual module into my O2 workstation. Also, the Indy cam made already an appearance on this channel as part of an earlier retro video editing exploration. The latter had been introduced as early as July 1993 alongside with the famous Indy low-end multimedia workstation. With subpar quality from today's perspective, the Indy cam was still miles ahead in comparison to Connectic's, later Logitech's Quick Cam, which would capture at a 320x240 resolution, whereas both the Indy cam and the O2 cam could do up to 640x480 pixels. In the early to mid 90s, video conferencing was still far away from where we are on the present day. Even so, as early as 1936, Germany's Postzentralamt had established a video telephone system between Berlin, Leipzig, Nuremberg and Munich. It would still take decades for it to arrive in the mainstream. With the advent of the ISDN technology during the 1980s, one of the use cases was believed to be video conferencing. However, ISDN was not very successful on a global scale, and with the rise of the internet during the 90s, IP-based conferencing, like pioneering CU-CME, was considered the future. And while at this stage, Microsoft was just at the beginning of providing collaborative workgroup functions, yet with NetMeeting not to arrive before mid-1996, Silicon Graphics had built their own product called InPerson. The earliest recording on archive.org is from June 1997, however the page copyright states 1994 and 1995. As IRIX 5.2 was released in March 1994 and IRIX 5.3 in November 1994, one can assume InPerson 1.0 and 1.2 were released alongside with IRIX throughout 1994, only 1 year short of the original release of the SGI Indy. Now, I didn't find actual proof if the Indy cam was released with the Indy from the get-go or not, but the following news article from November 1993 seems to indicate that the Indy cam was available since at least then. Said that, I started to look around where to obtain the InPerson software from. For IRIX 6.5, it's fairly simple as it's included on the base application CD from June 1998. Bear with me as I didn't check all later versions of the application CD, so I may have overlooked it. But according to my samples, it's not included in any later releases, but only the 1998 version. Installing it from Software Manager is simple and you'll end up with some new icons in the icon catalog afterwards. Also, don't forget to include the so-called PeoplePages software, as this provides the phonebook directory. Finding InPerson for SGI IRIX 5.3, as that's the version I have installed on my Indy workstation, deemed to be a lot more time consuming. When looking through archive.org, you'll be finding some results, but obviously not for release 1.0 and 1.2, the latter being the one that I want. Even so, I found this one here named IRIX Applications. The image file doesn't seem to be the right one, as I didn't find the actual InPerson files inside. These two sources seem to be identical, but still promising enough, and so is this copy of the desktop special edition. One of these CD images is clearly not a standard ISO, as it comes with a cue sheet, so let's use CDR-DAO to burn it. I didn't have it on the O2 yet, so I used decode to install it alongside with the CDR tools. Now, the cue sheet as I had retrieved it did contain DOS line breaks, and CDR-DAO complains about it, so I quickly removed them. Then I burned the coaster. And that seemed about right, because not only did the README indicate it contained InPerson version 2.0, but also double-clicking on the drive icon would start Software Manager right away. For certain, this is not the IRIX 6.5 application CD. It says Silicon Graphics Software Release 1.0 from 1996, and going by the dependency issue in Software Manager, it seems to be targeted at an earlier IRIX version. It's probably worth another look, but I have this one here in mind, which says Desktop Special Edition. And look, after I have burned it to a CD, it opens up just fine, and it includes InPerson 2.1 and something else spawning my interest. Soft Windows 1.25. I guess I'll have to look at that one as well. So I headed over to my Indy workstation and opened that repository from Software Manager to install both InPerson and PeoplePages. But it shouldn't be that easy, as Software Manager complains about the disk space requirements. Now, that actually is misleading, as even though it complains for not having enough disk space, it actually is the other way around. There is actually just too much disk space, as I mounted the extracted repository over NFS. And having dozens of terabytes obviously leads to calculatory overflow. So I had to fetch a local copy of the repository, unmount the NFS and retry the installation. And this time round I'll end up with the icons added to the icon catalog, both for InPerson and PeoplePages. But obviously, PeoplePages, which I need for dialing other people, seems to require a server of some sorts. As I'm trying to hook up the Indy running the older IRIX 5.3 with the O2, running the newer IRIX 6.5, I decided to make the O2 become the server. So my first step was to call up the InPerson help for any clues, but look at this. It's not readable due to an old format. SGI traditionally included Insight, which provided a digital bookshelf with all the documentation. This had in later releases of IRIX been replaced by HTML-based browsable documentation. However, not all products seem to have been lifted, and even when trying to access it from the local web browser, the InPerson documentation again is reported to be in the old format. This can be converted using the Insight admin utility, where you'll basically point it to the books directory with the -c argument to have it run through all of them and convert them as needed. And yes, it catches the InPerson documentation, which afterwards becomes accessible from within the application. But there seems to be lots of background processing required for the HTML-based help, as the system becomes quite unresponsive and the CPU time used by SGI help skyrockets. I let it run for a while until it settled, but the help wasn't of much use here. However, as reading from this information here, InPerson itself doesn't need a server, but the machine initiating the call becomes the server ad hoc. But that seems not to be true for PeoplePages, where I also ended up in the same situation about the incompatible help file format. So yet another conversion round with Insight admin. Once accessible, the PeoplePages documentation seems to indicate that you need a machine running the PPages daemon. And for that, as it needs to share the directory over the network, you need to have the NFS daemon enabled and configured as well. The NFS documentation is straight to the point, so I'm not going to lose too much time here. I'm more interested in setting up the PeoplePages server. As per the manual, the PPages daemon processes the /etc/config ppagesd.options file, which points it to the directory containing the database. Now, not only was that options file missing, but also was the example directory given at /user/local/InPerson. And when looking at check config, I noticed that the PeoplePages D daemon itself was missing. I probably didn't have that one installed, did I? Ah yes, the database server component is missing. Alright, with that being installed, back to the configuration. Now, even though the documentation speaks about /user/local/InPerson, I'm in objection to that. In my opinion, something like an actual database should belong to /var and not /user/local. So I'm about to create the directory /var/export/InPerson. Then I'll put that into the /etc/config/ppagesd.options file. As noted in the instructions, the second value is the name of the actual database. I then enable PPagesD and start it. Don't forget to also export the PeoplePages database directory via NFS by adding it into /etc/exports. The export fs-av command will then share it onto the network. Still on the O2, I was then firing up PeoplePages, which would provide a new public directory. It would eventually notice that I didn't have my record published and ask me for it. That's fine, except that the hostname is called IRIX, so IRIX is default hostname. Somehow I had forgotten to change it when setting up the machine. Changing it is as easy as editing /etc/sys_id and providing a new name. Don't forget to also check out /etc/host and swap the host name in there as well. One reboot later, the system has changed its name from IRIX to O2 and reports it also correctly on the PeoplePages, from which I finally publish my own user entry. Now, maybe there's a picture in your minds as well as to how PeoplePages works. I suspect that the PPagesD service advertises itself to the network, providing the hostname and NFS share of where the address book resides. Now, we're in the mid-90s, several years prior to zeroconf, MDNS, Bonjour and the like. So I let TCP-dump capture my traffic while starting up the PeoplePages address book. And see here, there's a request going out to a multicast address which sees a reply with some sort of referral. As suspected, it's indicating both the hostname and NFS share of where the address book is hosted. Checking with Netstat, I see two UDP ports listening on said multicast address, one presumably being the PeoplePages client, the other being the PPagesD daemon. And yes, closing the address book makes one disappear, and stopping the PPagesD daemon closes also the second socket. By adapting my TCP-dump filter specifically to match the multicast address 233.0.0.2 so I don't see any other traffic streams, I assume that this first request being sent out to the multicast address is a discovery to find the address book server, and this one here is the response as seen before with the actual location. So it doesn't look too much different from today, except that one would probably use an API abstraction for the address book access. Nevertheless, an interesting bit on how things were done 30 years ago. Switching over to the Indy, I added the O2 to have the shared directory mounted over NFS. It's important that it's mounted at the exact path name given, as this follows a given convention. And voila, now I get to see the O2 superuser record in the PeoplePages. Of course, this is overlapping, as right now I'm using the root account on the Indy as well. I know, one should not do that, but I came from installing software. Anyways, in order to not create a conflicting entry, I had my superuser account of the Indy being published with the hostname in it. And I even changed the one of the O2 superuser likewise to make it less ambiguous. So I've finally arrived at the stage where I can place an actual call via InPerson. As it seems, that only works if the InPerson software is running on the other end. And this is what it looks like. As you can see, the video quality is not that great, but still okay, at least as long as the lighting conditions are good. With artificial light, and specifically light from behind, it quickly becomes barely usable, as you see here. InPerson also has a built-in monitoring tool which shows the network bandwidth consumed. As I'm running in a LAN, the bandwidth of somewhere around 500 to 800 kilobits per second is acceptable. That's somewhere between 60 to 100 kilobytes per second. Still, that's a lot more than the average analog phone line or even an ISDN line could deliver. In the mid-90s, modem technology for analog lines delivered 28.8 kilobits at most, whereas ISDN could do 128 kilobits when bundling two lines. InPerson offered some configurative options to cope with low bandwidth connections, which surely came at the price of reducing the video resolution, but also the sound quality. On the other side, working with it inside the LAN was probably okay, and InPerson provided collaborative functions to share drawings, annotations and even screenshots with the meeting participants. There was no function yet, however, to directly drag and drop files. And even so I had attempted to communicate with my alter ego here, I couldn't get InPerson to work reliably, as every so often the video feed stopped abruptly and required me to restart the client. Even so, in the beginning, I had been talking about running InPerson 1.x on IRIX 5.3, but I eventually ended up installing 2.1 to it, the same version that was installed on IRIX 6.5. But maybe there's some level of incompatibility between the two still, which caused these sudden crashes. I should retry eventually between two IRIX 6.5 machines, however I don't have a third camera to connect to my Octane 2 workstation. As far as the history goes, Silicon Graphics ultimately seemed to have lost interest in the technology, as to the best of my knowledge, InPerson 2.1, as it was included on the 1998 application CD, was the last released version and ultimately dumped. SGI in later years also had a competing application called SGI Meeting, which seemed to be able to integrate with Microsoft NetMeeting and provide more functions than InPerson, like a chat, file transfers and even a shared clipboard. And apparently, SGI had licensed that technology to both HP and Sun Microsystems. Maybe that's also worth exploring at some point. How about you? When did you start with video conferencing? only with the technological maturity of recent years, or were you bleeding edge in the 90s or even the years prior? Let me know in the comments below. I'm the Vintage Collector and this was my story for today. Thanks for watching and see you again next Sunday.